So welcome to Universal God Message of Peace, and I'm Lee Weissman, and we're here with Khaled Zahir, doctor, and with Dr. Lale Tuncher. And last week we spoke about the idea, talked about what's our official title again?
Hatred and violence in the name of religion.
Hatred and violence in the name of religion. That's what we're talking about. And actually, Dr. Zahir did a beautiful job of talking. He focused uh, on how we see the differences between people as being kind of the source of hatred. And I'm going to do the same thing because I think that's actually a very good place to start. Except I'm going to start back in the misty creation of man. That's where I'm going to start, because that's where the Torah starts, right? The Torah starts with the creation of the world and talks about the creation of man. And we know that man was created, Adam, we have Adam and we have Eve, right? Of course, Adam is created alone, and then he's separated off into two pieces, and Eve. And being separated off into two pieces, the creation of Eve, is an important piece of this, because it's very clear that human beings are meant to be relational beings. It's very important that we be in a relationship with other human beings. From the very beginning, right? God says it's not good for man to be alone, right? It's important for other people to be in the world, right? You could dream that somehow or another, the best thing ever, if I wanted to be the most virtuous person ever, it would be very simple. Just never let me near any other person, right? I could become very virtuous like that. He says, no, we have to be able to deal with other people. And then Adam and Eve have two children. So they're referred to as Cain and Hevel in the Torah. And I forget what they're called in the Quran. What?
Abil and Qabil.
Abel and Cain. And one of the brothers, Cain, kills his brother. And it's a very strange incident in the Torah, because the Torah says that Cain and Abel had a conversation, and Cain killed Abel. Now we have no idea what the conversation was about. So the rabbis try to imagine the conversation. So one says they were arguing about, what do people argue about? They're arguing about land, right? They wanted land. Another one says they were arguing about money. Another one says they were arguing about religion, right? Because one of them brought a sacrifice, and the other brought a sacrifice of animals or vegetables. Maybe they're arguing about that. Another said they were arguing about women, right? Because they had to get married, and how is that going to work? And so, but we have no idea why he killed his brother, but we do know that from the very beginning of mankind, there was the violence of even brother against brother. From the very beginning, at the very beginning of mankind. Now the story then develops, and if we look at the very beginning of the Torah, we see the same pattern over and over again of conflict between relatives, conflict between brothers. So then we have Abraham who has we go forward some generations, 10 generations, and we have Abraham, and he has two sons. He has a son Isaac, right? His son Isaac, and his son Ishmael, and there's a conflict between the two sons, between the two wives. Of course, the one wife, Hajar, she's sent off with her son, with her son Ishmael, becomes the basis for the Hajj and so forth. And there's this separation now that happens between the two families of Abraham, right? Really the two sides of the families of Abraham become separated. Now, one of the things that Rabbi Jonathan Sachs says that I think is very important here is that there's very little, if you read the story as it is, forget about what the later rabbis say it, but if we say about it, but if we read the story as it's written in the Torah, there's a lot of sympathy for Ishmael. And it's very clear that Abraham loves his son, right? It's very clear that Abraham loves his son Ishmael. And it's very, very difficult for him to send off, it's very, very difficult for him to send off his son. And when Ishmael is in the desert and when he's thirsty, the way that the Torah writes it is for us to feel a sense of sadness for him and sadness for his mother, right? So it's not a hostile division. It's not a hostile division. And so part of what the Torah seems to be saying to us is there are two kind of messages. One message is we are all descended from the same couple. We are one human family, right? We are one human family. And even more than that, we were all created in the image of God. Now, that does not mean by any stretch of the imagination a physical image of God. It means that God breathed into us a divine soul, and that we therefore have a kind of divine dimension to us. Right? All human beings have that divine dimension. All of us come from the same family. It even says in the Talmud, that why is it that God created man from one couple instead of many couples? Was so that nobody could ever say, my father is greater than yours, right? So that we're all from one family. And yet at the same time, from the very beginning of mankind, we have conflict. In the very beginning of mankind, we have this kind of separation of brothers. And that continues, right? We have Yaakov, and he has a brother Esav, right? And those two separate also, right? And Esav goes his way. And according to the rabbinic understanding, Esav, the son Esav, Yaakov's brother, becomes the ancestor of Western civilization, of Greeks and Romans and so forth. And Yaakov becomes the ancestor of Bnei Yisrael, the Jewish people. And so you have this idea of sibling rivalry, in which different peoples have different characteristics, are all part of one human family, but also do come in conflict with each other, right? Also do come in conflict with each other. So it sets up this, I think, an interesting dynamic, right? Of the idea of there's us, right? And there's not us, and then there's all of us. All of that is true at the same time. There's us, not us, and all of us. Now, I'm going to add another category, which is really an interesting one. So when Bnei Yisrael is formed, of course, in Bnei Yisrael also, I should also be clear, right? Bnei Yisrael, the Jewish people are also divided up into tribes, right? The sons of Jacob also are also each have their own tribe. So it's not right. So it's not just a unified people, the different tribes. Each one has its own flag. Each one has its own encampment. There they are in the desert, right? And each one has those has different responsibilities for those tribes. Eventually, they get different pieces of land and so forth. So again, we're all one, and yet there are these divisions. That there's these divisions between us, right? We're all one people, and yet each of these tribes has its own personality, its own way of being. The Talmud even says they had their own way of praying, right? Each one had their own method. That they had slightly different ways of praying. So once the Jewish people come into the land, so now they have the challenge, right? They have the challenge of living in a land with people who are also not them. Now it's interesting because the conquering of the land under Yehoshua, after Moses dies and the land is conquered, they're told to defeat the seven Canaanite nations that were living there. A one-time order to battle like was never battled before. A complete destruction, really a complete destruction. But at the end of it, right? But also offering the opportunity of peace to those people who wanted peace. So for at the end, you end up with a society which has both Jews, right? Has people who are Bnei Yisrael and people who are not Bnei Yisrael. And a third category of person is now added to the us and not us. And that third category is the person who is not us and not us. Okay? So the idea is that if you were a non-Jewish person and you were living in the land of Israel, if you were an ethical monotheist, right? So if you followed the 7 laws of Noah, right, which are considered to be the kind of the universal code of human behavior, which is basic monotheism, no killing, no stealing, no adultery, and so forth. If you followed those 7 laws, you were considered to be a citizen, and you're considered to be a part of the society. You're considered part of society. You're not a member of Bnei Israel, but you're called a ger toshav. You're a resident stranger, so to speak, right? And you have absolute rights. So you have all the rights of a citizen. You have all the rights of a citizen, and you're part of society. You're part of society. So let me just I just want to read something to you, just to give you an idea of how far this goes, and kind of the ultimate conception of this. So back in the early 20th century, there was a thinker who has since become considered to be like the founder, the kind of spiritual founder of what people call religious Zionism. And he wrote the following about a verse in the Mishnah that says, "Our brothers, people of a certain place, come in peace." So he says, "Our brothers," and here he's talking to those people, to the non-Jews who are living in the land. He wrote this before the establishment of the state of Israel. He was the chief rabbi before the establishment of the state of Israel. It says, "Our brothers, you are united with us by the power of fraternity that is perfected in the centrality of the city of God, the holy mountains." He's talking to the population of Jerusalem. "Simultaneously, we recognize that you are also people of a certain place. We have no desire to divest you of your allegiance to the city in which you dwell, which must naturally be dear to you. This approach also acts as an exercise, a manual for the great universal peace that Israel should feel toward all peoples, according to God's Torah, whose ways are ways of pleasantness and peace. A stranger and resident, he will live among you," says the Torah in relation to Gentiles who live among us in our land. "We insist only that he desist from an evil and injurious path. He be a straight man according to the Noahide code. Inasmuch as he has a nation and a homeland for which he longs and has affection, he is a stranger. Nevertheless, the Torah recognizes him as a resident in terms of affability, freedom, and human rights. Let your heart not persuade you to rob him of his natural feelings for his people and land, making him simply a resident. Rather, a stranger and resident, he will live among you." Right? The idea is that there are people who are not part of us in that respect. but share a common place, share a common mission. And this is, I think, a very powerful idea. I think it's an idea that that withered on the vine, because what happened is in 2000 years of in 2000 years of exile, during those 2000 years of exile, where Jews lived as a minority in largely in places, especially in Europe, but less so in North Africa and less so in the Ottoman Empire, but lived in places where they were more isolated from their non-Jewish neighbors. Um, this idea of commonality, this idea of being kind of part of a greater society, I think is something that was largely lost. And I think that as Jews lived in ghettos, as Jews lived in the mevelas, in the ghettos of the Middle East, and the juderias in Spain and so forth, like the idea that there were non-Jews who were also ethical monotheists, who also were looking to build the world in the same ways that we imagined that we should be building the world, was something that was substantially lost. Not lost completely, because in the Middle Ages, the question often comes, how should we regard, right? How should we regard our Muslim and Christian neighbors, for example, right? Should we consider them to be idolaters? Well, obviously, right? Because, obviously, we can't consider Muslims idolaters. They're clearly not idolaters. And there are many laws that apply only to idolaters, right? So the rabbis had to deal with that, right? The rabbis had to deal with that. The same law can't apply, right, to people who are not idolaters as people who are idolaters. People are clearly not idolaters. With Christians, it was a little more complicated, right? To decide whether they were or they weren't because of theological differences, so on, was still more difficult. And again, in practical terms, there's a sense in which people can look and say, listen, we are part of one human family, and not only part of one human family, but we're also on the same mission, right? The one of the great jurists, Moses Maimonides, the Rambam, right, he said we should be thankful for Christianity and Islam, because they essentially spread the essential messages of Judaism to the world, right? You can go to the farthest edges of the globe. I remember years ago being in South India, and my neighbor was a Muslim, and he invited me over to his porch, and he recited a poem to me about the prophet Yosef, peace be upon him, Yusuf. And it was a beautiful poem in Tamil. And I thought to myself, how crazy is it that I'm at the end of the world? I'm in South India. Oh, where is, no, right? I'm in South India, and he's sitting here, and he's telling me this beautiful poem about a Jewish prophet, and he's telling me because he knows I'm Jewish, and he knows this is one of your ancestors. By the way, another brother story, right? The story of, right, Joseph and his brothers, right? Another story about brothers having fights with each other. So we recognize, I think, there's a recognition that people do have differences with each other. That even though we're created as one family, with distinct characteristics, and yet there's this possibility through faith, right? Through faith and through ethical behavior to come together to come together and to make a just society. And that's the ultimate goal. The ultimate goal is to be able to come together and create just societies. And now, I'm going to stop there because because then we can talk about how that goes wrong. Okay. So that's if it were to go right. And now then I'll tell you about how it goes wrong. So questions, thoughts?
That's a very, very good presentation, and I really was you know not just impressed. I got lost, because there were so many things that were resonating. But you mentioned that you're going to talk about the fact that it goes wrong, and how does it go wrong. That's exactly what the question was coming to my mind. You know, while you mentioned quite a few um, passages that talk about the reason for all of us to be united, to feel at peace with each other, to respect each other. I think the big challenge is, and I'm talking quite as much about Jews as much as it is relevant to us Muslims as well, and I'm sure Christians too, that while there are some remarkable passages that talk about the commonalities of humanity and the reasons why we should respect each other and should sympathetic and loving and caring, there are some problematic passages as well. And I think the challenge is how to deal with them. And I think once we are able to deal with those passages in a way that we can understand and clarify that, hey, they are not necessarily requiring us to be aggressive against others, at least not anymore. Maybe we talk about some specific reason for it or whatever. Uh, because, there are people good, always good in all societies, all religions, but there are some who are aggressive, and they pick those passages and isolating them from the rest of the teachings, they are able to somehow attract the attention, minds, and sentiments of their brand of believers to become belligerent and aggressive against others. So that's one important challenge. And like you mentioned that there was this uh, you know attack on the local people in Palestine by Joshua and his companions. Uh, it's important to understand. I mean, uh, there are similar instances, about the Muslim history as well. The way I try to understand, well, of course, the general understanding is that there was something era specific which cannot be generalized. Like, for instance, that the Almighty chose the children of Israel for the purpose of his message to be put across to the rest of the mankind through them. And if there were people who resisted that possibility, despite knowing that it was from the Creator, then this was, kind of a punishment that was sent to them. But really, it has to come from the text, and it really has to be made more convincing for the reader and for those who are trying to understand. So over to you.
Yeah. Well, okay, so that is very clear. I mean, one of the things that's clear is yes, you can use the text to justify all sorts of things. And I'll sort of take it in the direction you took it. I mean, the commandment to conquer the land was a one-time commandment, and it was the idea, as I understand it, exactly as you said, that here was a group of people, these seven tribes who had heard of, right, and had witnessed, right, in their world, all of these, right, they had heard about all the miraculous things that had happened to these people, and yet nevertheless were going to resist them, and would never have been able to participate meaningfully, although they were offered the opportunity, right? And so they had denied the opportunity to participate in the creation of this new society in the way that God wanted, this model society that God wanted to create. And so, and in a one-time conquering, God said, okay, this is how you're going to do it. Now, now, are there people who want to generalize that and say, okay, well, that's how God told us to conquer the land, so now we should be conquering the land in the same way? There are people who will say that, right? I mean, there are people who are, I'm going to say, fanatical. I'm sure I could get in trouble for that, but I would certainly say they're fanatical. Of course, fanatics never like to be called fanatics. But of course, there are extremists who hold those kind of views, particularly the followers of Rabbi Meir Kahane, some of whom are very powerful now, who hold that kind of a view and say, no, this is, now what that whole argument I made before, of course, gets lost in this, right? Gets lost in it. Say, well, wait a second. So are we talking about people who are idolaters? Are we talking about people are we talking about people who are resisting the message of God and the establishment of a just society? He says no, right? That's not the people. That's not people we're talking about here. Okay, so you're certainly not talking about idolaters. You're talking about people who substantially follow the Noahide laws, right? Follow all the things you would want them to follow. Then you could argue, you say, well, wait a second. No, in addition to that, they have to accept the sovereignty. They have to accept the sovereignty of the state. Well, you heard what Rav Kook just said. He didn't say that, right? It says that's not a foregone conclusion. But if you want to make all of that stuff I said before irrelevant, you can make it irrelevant. You say, okay, well, and okay. In addition to following the laws of Noah, in addition to wanting to be part of our society, they also have to accept our brand of sovereignty, and right, which is not necessarily, it's, can you find an opinion to support that? Of course, you can find an opinion to support that, right? There's always, there's always going to be somebody who's going to come up with something like that. And even though the Rambam seems to say that, but again, he's talking theoretically. See, part of the problem, especially when it comes to the state, is that lacking a state for 2,000 years, right? The law hasn't developed. The law has developed, and the ethics have not developed in those areas, right? Because for 2,000 years they didn't have an army, so nobody for 2,000 years has thought deeply and substantially about what it means to have an army, about what it means to use force, because Jews didn't have the ability to use force. So while we have a lot of literature about ritual, right? We have books and books and books and books. I wish I were back in the library so I could show you. We have books and books and books and books about ritual. We have a total of 3 books, maybe 3 books, 3 little books on the laws of war, because that was just not an issue. And so now that's become an issue, that ethics is still developing, and developing in some ways, right? So among the books, one of the books is extremist, right? One of the books is extremist, and so extreme that even the government of Israel threw the guy in jail, because as somebody who was promoting terrorism against Palestinians. And another one is much more moderate, and the other one is much more moderate still. But the people who are extremist, which one are they going to be reading? They're going to be reading the one who's extremist, and so they become fixed in their beliefs. And so what you do is, you look for the voices, the voices of people who are able to who are able to see the texts in a more reasonable way. But yes, there's certainly people who see the text those ways. Um, recently, for example, you know, uh, after October 7th, I kept seeing uh, all of these talks on revenge. Revenge is generally not, before October 7th, if you looked up Jewish talks on revenge, it was all about not doing revenge. The idea is revenge is not a good thing, right? Everybody knows it doesn't work well in societies. It's a big mess among people. It's not a good, it's not a positive quality. And all of a sudden, everybody was saying it's a positive quality. All of a sudden, everybody's finding the verses from everywhere, right? Because you have such a huge literature, right? They're finding them, right? They're finding verses in the Torah. It's a verse in the Torah where the word nekama, where the word for revenge comes between God's names. It says Hashem's God's name, then nekama, God's name again. Look at that. This is sandwiched by God's name. This is and various other things. All of a sudden, these texts, they come up, and a new argument is being created for how wonderful, for how what a glorious thing revenge is, and it's very difficult. It becomes a very difficult thing because there's always an audience for people. Always an
I
audience like that.
absolutely.
And it appeals, and as I said, it appeals to the, I think to some of the lowest, to lowest parts of ourselves, and it activates on people's emotions, and um and the texts sound good. I mean, that's unfortunately that's kind of the way it works. You can line up it's very interesting. There's one text that has become very important in the past, I'm going to say in the past 2 years. It's a line from a midrash from that's not was not very popular, and I've never seen it quoted before. It's that um, those who are those who are those who are kind to the cruel will end up being cruel to the kind. That's the line. And I never heard it before. All of a sudden, I hear it 24 hours a day. All of a sudden, I hear it 24 hours a day as an explanation for everything, right? I mean, don't be nice to anybody, right? It really don't be nice to anybody, because eventually, you're gonna find out that they're bad, and you're gonna regret it, and you're gonna be bad. It 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 becomes this. It becomes, and it trumps everything, right? I mean, love your neighbor, love the stranger, anytime you mention love, this is uh it's chalked out, and really and it's an interesting time for these things, because of course people are trying to make sense out of a very difficult situation. Unfortunately, I feel, I'm very open about this, I feel that these kinds of extremists, these paths, never take us anyplace good.
Right. It's very interesting what you've mentioned. Uh, Honestly, I tell you, I have a feeling, and I keep saying it, that the biggest problem that we have, not only amongst religious people, but amongst politicians and others too, is proper communication. We don't talk to each other properly. Uh, we don't understand each other. I think there is always a solution to every problem. And I think there is always an explanation. I may be sounding a bit too optimistic and too strong in what I'm saying, but there is always one correct point of view which is balanced and which can be understood, provided people decide that they're not going to be emotional and biased. when they're talking to each other, something not easy to come by, something which is extremely important. So you see, for example, whether we are talking about the Quranic text or the biblical text, the Jewish faith or the Islamic faith, I think one thing can be put across to all believers that look here, our God cannot contradict himself. That is, to me, the most fundamental principle that needs to be there at the back of our minds while we are reading the text. So if the text is telling me that if you will, thou shalt not kill, if you will kill one soul, it is as big an evil as if you've killed the entire humankind. This understanding, this principle cannot go along with, is not consistent with the commandment that go and kill them. So go and kill them has to be explained some way. And the only way it can be explained is that it was something specific to the situation when it was mentioned. And honestly, I believe, as far as the Quranic text is concerned, that situation cannot come again because it was peculiar to the times of the prophets, of the messengers, when the divine revelation was coming down directly from the Creator. Now it is we mortal humans with our limitations who try to interpret. Now, when you have to interpret two different parts of a text in a way that one has to be given preference over the other, it has got to be the one which is more general, universal, which is talking about a principle and not an exception. But obviously, that might sound complicated to some people. But what I'm saying is, honestly, there is no other way out except to continue to talk to each other in a way that we are trying to understand each other, in a way that I am telling myself constantly that I can be wrong. This is my understanding. Let's listen to the other point of view. And violence, hatred, is the last thing that we can agree to follow as a principle.
Yeah, unfortunately, I think there's a strange there's a strange emotional strength that comes with hatred that I think it really is attractive to a lot of people, and especially when that especially when that hatred is backed up by religion. There's something about thinking that you're hating for God that just is very heady, and people really they really get into it. It's a very different, very hard space to get out of. I will say that there are people who have been successful. I mean, there's a rabbi who named Rabbi Menachem Froman, Froman. You should look him up. He's an amazing person. He passed away a few years ago. He was actually the rabbi rabbi and founder of a settlement called Tekoa in the West Bank. And he had very, very good relationships with his Palestinian neighbors. When settlers burned their mosque, he came and he brought Qurans for them. He studied the Quran. He studied the Hadith. He was a very brilliant person, and believed very deeply that religion could be part of the solution and not just part of the problem. He even had a dialogue going with leaders of Hamas, even with Sheikh Yassin. I mean, very fascinating stories about him, and he really changed his community. I mean, his expressions of love and care. Somebody asked him about his attitude about Palestinians. He says, God said, love your neighbor. My neighbors are Palestinians, which was true, And so, he said, what am I supposed to do? He said to me, love my neighbor. He said this was my neighbor. So And I think that there are people like that who model that kind of behavior, who are able to communicate even with people who completely disagree. He describes an argument he had with Sheikh Yassin, in which he said to him, Sheikh, you're a believer, I'm a believer. And Sheikh Yassin said to him, he says, with you, I could make peace in 5 minutes. He said, I want you to know something, Sheikh. He says, I just want you to know that I'm really afraid you're going to go to hell. He says, because of the violence, everything else. I'm just telling you, one believer to another believer says the way you're going, he says that you're good. And he was able to talk on that level because he realized he was talking to a fellow believer. He was talking to him as a person. He was talking to him as a human being to a human being, and not just a political, not and I think that religion, the only reason why I do stuff like this is because I really believe that religion is part of the answer, and not part of the problem. And one of the things that we do have to teach is communication, right? Because if you look, if you look, like there's so much material on how people should communicate with each other, how they should talk to each other, about how you use speech, about how you argue. Even when the Quran talks about, arguing with the best, right? That's that in itself, that in itself is amazing advice, right? If only people would follow that little tiny bit of advice. We have so many traditions about how it is that a person should speak, and not to speak over people, not to speak for people, to always make sure that you attribute things to other people and you don't steal their ideas, and to make sure even in the old days, rabbis used to not speak loudly. They used to have a translator, right? Why? Because they were teaching how to speak quietly. Because people needed to learn to speak quietly, right? So they would have somebody else who would yell for them, right? Because their job was to show how to speak quietly, and I think that it's really important to teach. It's really important to teach those things, because otherwise nobody's going to learn anything, right? If people don't learn to talk to each other, they can't learn anything. And
Absolutely.
and so that's
So, Rabbi Weissman, I don't know. I still have to sort out my visa issues of the American visa. But you can come over. We need to spread across this message to a bigger number of people, honestly. Dr. Lale can do something about it. Because, I mean, our world is a troubled place right now.
it is
And,
it
you
is.
know, something really needs to be done about it. I mean, I quite agree with you. I absolutely believe that religion is a part of the answer's solution. Unfortunately, it has been made to appear a part of the problem, probably the biggest problem, the
Right.
biggest reason. And so that's sad. It's so very sad. And that is why I firmly believe that is why we have atheism spreading, you know, amongst the youth. It's getting more and more popular because the religion
Of course.
doesn't seem to be acceptable. Sadly,
Who would want to be part of that? I mean,
that's
I
right.
don't like who wants to join that club? I mean,
So,
I listen, I understand, I can't blame, I see some of the stuff. I see you see the things that are done in the name of religion. Yeah, well, where it's very difficult to make an argument, because uh, who would want to join that? Who
absolutely.
wants to be part of that?
Why?
Um,
Why should anybody do it? Yeah,
it's and I think I have to work very hard. I think we work very hard to kind of to create paths, to create paths, and to clear away the paths that don't lead in those directions. Um, and and I think, and part of it is I think, you know just just doing this. I mean, the part of the amazing thing is the incredible ignorance. I think one of the reasons why, we don't see the human family is because we've covered our eyes.
True.
We're not paying attention. We're so used to, seeing people as being so different from us, and instead of looking at them and saying these are human beings, and
That's
um,
right.
you know.
Rabbi, I just wanted to ask one probably irrelevant question before I would want Dr. Lale to take over. I have always been wondering, why is it that from amongst the 12 brothers, the tribe, the family, the nation emerging from the most famous of those 12 brothers didn't turn out to be quite as prominent? I'm talking about Joseph. Why is it that the children of Joseph are not the most prominent amongst the Jews?
Ephraim and Manasseh, so there are two tribes. Well, he got two tribes. So
Okay.
he got two tribes. All the other brothers only got one tribe. He got two tribes. Uh, both of his sons got tribes. I don't know. It's a good question. Um, I think at the end of the day, I'll give you the rough the difficult answer. The difficult answer is we never know how our children are going to turn out. You know,
Absolutely.
Even Moses. You know what? Moses had two children. We never hear about them, right? You wonder, like, what happened to Moses' children? Like, and we're never told that they were great. Never told when sometimes you have a great man, they have children who are not so. It's interesting, although one of the things about uh yeah, not only that, I mean, yeah, it's true. Neither of those tribes, like rises to like great prominence. That's true. Yeah.
Good. I think it's a very good answer.
Yeah.
I got it. I think
Yeah.
what you said is very relevant, which is great. I mean, it's not necessary that if you are the son of a great father, you're also going to turn out to be a great son.
Yeah.
Not
True.
necessary.
Yeah. True. Yeah. If only it were true. If only it were
That's
true.
right. That's right. Dr. Lale, it's your turn now.
Your turn.
Thank you so, so much, Rabbi Weissman. That was really great how you shared stories of biblical history of the prophets, and starting from Abel and Cain, peace be upon them, and how the two first brothers, one of them killed the other. There's so much wisdom that we can learn if we all reflect on the stories of the prophets. As we mentioned last week as well, that a lot of, I think, I believe that a lot of the cause of hatred is ignorance and arrogance. So if we all try to sort of seek more knowledge together and for the right reason, to get to truth rather than being right, then I think that would, solve a lot of the world's problems, especially through gentle dialogue with each other and respect. So what we're doing, I think, is really great. So God bless you both. I would like to say, from my perspective, I have like a special interest in mental health. And as a doctor who, I see so many patients who suffer with mental health problems. And as a doctor, we're expected to give out medication, and it covers over the issue for a while. It's a little bit like, somebody drinking alcohol to help forget their problems, but it doesn't get to the underlying cause of the mental health issues most of the time. And sometimes, obviously, there's chemical imbalances and there's physical causes, and that's something perhaps separate that needs to be looked at. But from the perspective of, the spiritual troubles that people are dealing with, the answer, I believe, is faith, in a creator, and returning to our creator, returning to our source, returning and listening to that inner call from God within all of us. But the problem is that what's happened, and I think Shaitan is very clever, he's tried to destroy this from the bottom, which is, he's looked at, obviously religion has the answers. So let's try and give religion a bad name. Let's try and defile God's name through ignorance and arrogance. And this is the seed which, you know, grows within each of us that drives us away. We see people doing bad things in the name of religion, and because of our own ignorance about what that religion teaches, and because of our own arrogance, you know, we then turn to atheism, or we reject the idea of there being a creator. So we stop listening to that inner call for peace and for healing, because that is the true healing, you know, I believe. So instead we go to doctors, we go to, you know, other people, which is fine. I'm not saying we shouldn't, but we're running away from ourselves. We're running away from who we really are. And the healing is, the answer is inside us. So the worst thing about what really upsets me about what's going on in the world at the moment, and I really feel for all the Jews like yourself, who are such beautiful people, who do not agree with, you know, what's happening in the name of Judaism, in Israel right now, and, you know, some of the things that are happening there. And the same for yourself, Dr. Zahir, who's such a good example for Islam, and those who defile the religion of Islam, the effect it has on, you know, the true righteous people who are just seeking truth and seeking to have a relationship with their creator and to be a good role model unto other people. My advice would be, let's just keep doing what we can. None of us are perfect, you know. Revenge is for the one who's perfect. You know, revenge is for God, who is perfect. And actually, who are we to throw the first stone? Who are we to revenge somebody when we ourselves are not perfect? And actually, fine, that option is there. And if you're going to do eye for an eye, that option is there, but there's a better way. So why don't we seek that better way? Why don't we seek the strength to want to do that better thing, which is to forgive, to be patient, and to ask God to deal with it? And let's just try to be the best versions of who we can, really. And my call is for all those people who don't believe in God because of the bad people, the bad things that some people do, either because of ignorance or arrogance. Have mercy on them as well. Seek truth for yourself, and please don't reject the idea of there being a creator, because that's, it will heal you. If you can connect to your creator, that will heal you. May we all seek truth together, and God bless you both. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Okay. Assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu alaikum. Shalom.